Hey, friends. I feel like I've been neglecting you because it's been a few days since my last chapter. Yeah, things have been going on. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So, my friend Carl really wanted me to do one of these with a fire going in the fireplace, which would have been very picturesque. But then it got warm out, so so I wasn't able to do that. If it gets chilly again, Carl, you get a chapter with a fireplace. Chapter 18, William Dawes Slept Here. And again, this one starts with an epigraph. We found out that's the right name for this. And it reads as follows. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. Charles Dickens, David Copperfield. December 10th, 2003. For the second time since going on the road, I'm in love. And for the second time, the object of my affection is a city. The first city I fell for was San Francisco, and who could blame me? This time, it's Boston. I hardly know where to begin trying to explain what it is that makes Boston so wicked awesome, as the locals would say. But trust me, it's wicked awesome. It's like New York in that it's an old city and the locals tend to be direct and straightforward, but it has less hustle and a lot less bustle. It's urban sharp meets Midwestern solid. And unlike New York, you don't have to muscle your way through the day. Everywhere you look, there's some brilliantly ancient building with a plaque identifying it as the site of Ben Franklin's former dry cleaner, or the first shoelace manufacturer in America, or the first brick ever. And whatever isn't old is made to look old. The local 7-Eleven, subtly embedded in a vintage stone building, was identified by one of those old-fashioned hanging metal signs over the door, which creaked as it swung in the breeze. I half expected it to read, Ye Old 7-Eleven, and in this case, Old 7 and 11 all have an extra E at the end. The Kinkos and the Supercuts were similarly disguised as early American quaint. Electric street lamps were programmed to pulsate, simulating the flames of old gas lamps. I wanted to dip my quill and write something on parchment, then ring a big bell and read it in the town square. Knowing that we'd be here for a substantial amount of time, 5 weeks, and because I am, by now, a terribly sophisticated itinerant stage actor, I had the dazzlingly savvy idea of renting an apartment and taking up residence like a proper Bostonian. And so I found, through an agency, a fantastic, tiny, one-bedroom located on Champney Place, a cobblestoned alley near the top of Beacon Hill. It was less expensive than a hotel and a lot homier. It even had a fireplace, and everyone in the company, including me, was terribly impressed by my wicked awesome housing coup. Throughout the following weeks, I had the best of both worlds. I was at once a tourist and a local, soaking in the history during the day, then stopping to pick up food and firewood at my neighborhood market before heading home, fixing an early dinner, and settling in for a late afternoon nap by the fire before going to work. Some days, I'd just strike out with nowhere to go and wander. Every time, I'd end up someplace stimulating. It's that kind of town. Boston in November. Could anything be better? How come no one's written a song about it? The rain-streaked brownstones, the golden leaves, the bundled-up college kids, the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages hauling tourists through the winding streets. It's picturesque, to be sure. But they're never pushy about it. None of San Francisco's Market Street hawkers or Times Square tourist traps, no LA maps to the stars homes. Boston says, look, we've been doing the whole city thing for a while now, okay? We invented the toothpick, for crying out loud. Yes, they really did. So look around if you like and let us know if you have any questions. Nothing to get all hyper about. Whenever the actors arrive at a new tour stop, one of our first tasks is to find our way to the new theater and then find our way around backstage. Help is provided. Our company managers always furnish us with maps of the city, which feature directions to the stage door. And then once inside, we follow the trail created by our stage managers, photocopies of the famous Les Mis logo, Little Cosette, before a tattered French flag, with the caption, "Cosette says this way," are taped to the walls throughout the backstage area. Each one has a destination like orchestra pit, or women's ensemble, or trapdoor with a hand-drawn arrow. The constantly changing layout of our work area makes these directions a necessity. And so on opening night, I bundled up, locked my front door, and went off in search of what would turn out to be my favorite theater ever, the Colonial. Across Boston Common, across Boylston Street, around a corner, and down a brick alley, I found a picture-perfect, rusty metal stage door. Past the classic doorman's desk, stretched along the hallway with dark wood wainscoting, following Cosette's paper arrows, I climbed 4 flights of stairs, turned down a narrow hallway, and stopped at the weathered wooden door with my name on it. Inside was a small square room with faded carpet, an old mirror framed by a few light bulbs, a once overstuffed chair, most likely a remnant from the set of some play, and a tiny, rusty sink in the corner. As a kid, when I fantasized about living the spectacular life of a touring stage actor, this was exactly the kind of place I always pictured. Beautifully decayed, dripping with history, reeking of old show business, grand in its way. I can imagine the 19th century version of our company arriving with trunks and carpet bags, everyone in hats, a yapping dog under the leading lady's arm, the men with walking sticks as we got off our train, rode to the theater in horse-drawn carriages, and took up temporary residence there at the Colonial. By the way, that name on the door thing, still cool. Neat, I always think to myself. I must be in the show. The historical Colonial Theater, everything's historical in ye old Boston, sits wedged into the middle of Boylston Street. It was built in the year 1900 and christened with a production of Ben-Hur that featured a cast of 350 and an on-stage chariot race with 12 live horses. You know, intimate, low-budget kind of thing. Throughout its history, the Colonial has presented the world premieres and out-of-town tryouts of such legendary shows as Porgy and Bess, Carousel, and Annie Get Your Gun. In the lobby sits a big marble table where Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote parts of Oklahoma, and where Bob Fosse once jumped up to demonstrate a dance step. There's still a nick in the table's surface from Bob's boot. And here's me, performing there. What an honor. I mean, think of it. Merman played the Colonial. After our usual sound check, we had our usual actor-dresser bonding. I liked my dresser Maureen right away. A salt of the earth, meat and potatoes, mother of 6. She and her husband had 3 kids of their own and liked parenthood so much that they decided to adopt 3 more. Maureen seemed to perfectly embody the Boston character, a tough, unflappable exterior and a kind, warm heart. Performing on the stage of the Colonial made me feel like I was on Broadway. It wasn't only the dazzling beauty of this ornate old jewel box, but also the remarkable intimacy of the auditorium. When the music started and the lights came up and we walked out onto the stage for the first time, it felt like the audience was in our laps. Something about the layout of the room connected us with them in a way that I hadn't experienced elsewhere. We could see faces. We could hear sighs, gasps, chuckles. When I performed Master of the House, I felt like the whole theater was my inn and every audience member a guest and potential mark. We were all closely gathered in the same room, breathing the same air, communicating almost as clearly as if in conversation. Near the end of Act 2, there was some backstage confusion about the placement of one of my costumes, and I couldn't find it. I've handled things better. I got pissy and nervous and anxious. And while I was busy doing all that, Maureen quietly and calmly found the costume, brought it to where I was having my little baby fit, gently touched my arm, gave me a warm smile, you know, like you do with a crazy person, and said simply, "Here we go, let's get you dressed." I didn't just have a dresser, I had a temporary mom. From that moment on, Maureen and I got along famously. She was so funny, and I loved listening to her talk with the other dressers. They were all Bostonians, and the accents were as thick as clam chowder. "Hey, Maureen, did your daughter like a party?" Oh, that accent, I love it. Very hard to pin down. Just when you're getting used to park the car and have it yet, you'll hear, "The hot water's out, so now I can't take a bath." And then there's this diphthong thing that they use. I haven't heard it anywhere else, kind of a la sound. A New Yorker drinks coffee. In Boston, it's coffee. But here's the trick. They don't use it in every instance, so you drink it in the morning. Authentic Bostonian employs a complex system of variable vowels, and only they seem to know the rules. The name Boston Common is a real challenge. A native explained that the right pronunciation is, and this is a bit of a tongue twister, Boston Common. And let's not even get into the Massachusetts negative positive. "So don't I" means "boy do I." Or potatoes, which are those brown tubers from which French fries are made. Fortunately for you readers, I found a great website where you can learn the whole glorious lingo. Now, if that website is still active, I will put up a link here. If you're planning a trip, I suggest you start studying now. Believe me, it's quite contagious. Before you know it, you will have adopted the local tongue. One day I was on the phone with a friend back home. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "I'm in my apartment," I said without thinking. "Why do you ask?" Our entire opening week in Boston was terrific. Enthusiastic crowds, good performances, fantastic on-the-ball local crew members. The citizens of my new favorite city loved the theater. The crowds remained enthusiastic even during the series of shows that we have come to refer to as Disco Miserable. So named because, without warning, our computerized lighting board went wonky and started executing random lighting changes that weren't part of the design, often at the least opportune moments in the show. Lighting is an important element in Les Mis because, besides showing you where to look, the lights also distract you away from where not to look. Often, crew members are actually on stage in a patch of darkness moving set pieces, or cast members are buried in the shadows about to be revealed. That is, we're usually buried in the shadows. During the disco period, there is no guarantee. At the beginning of the show, Jean Valjean is released from prison. Alone on stage, he tastes freedom for the first time in 19 years. As he starts off in search of work, he sings, "The day begins, and now let's see what this new world can do for me." It was in this delicate, theatrical moment, right on the words, "the day begins," that all the lights blasted up to full one night, prematurely revealing a stage full of farm workers. Boy, when the day begins, it really begins. This kind of thing continued to happen throughout a week's worth of performances. The technical guys tried everything. Every night before the show, someone would say, "I think we got it fixed now." And then we'd get a dim, dark, moody wedding scene, or blinking lights at the convent, or no light at the inn, Disco Miserable. And then all at once, everything was fine, back to normal. Each lighting cue happened flawlessly, consistently, every performance. Disco was dead. I was hanging out by the stage door one night before the show with Paul, our head electrician, and we got to talking. "So, Paul, looks like the night lights are back to normal, huh?" "Yeah." "What was the problem?" "I don't know. Old board. We have a new one on order." "Oh." He took a long drag from his cigarette. "You know how we fixed it, right?" "No, how?" Paul slid the cardboard sleeve off his cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee and held it up with a rakish grin. "One of these." "You're kidding." "Nope. Wedged into the slot behind the computer card." "How long can we do the show like that?" "Forever. It's in there pretty good." A big Broadway tour of an epic musical based on a timeless literary classic held totally at the mercy of a Dunkin' Donuts cardboard cup sleeve. There was so much to see and enjoy in Boston, and each establishment had a story. Walking home late one night, Lois and I stopped off in a pub for a drink. "You know," the bartender volunteered, "this is the oldest pub in America." When pressed, he admitted that the pub had actually been moved in its entirety from its original spot, which was in fact the site of the oldest pub in America. Still, that is one damn old pub. When my friend Sue came to visit, we tagged along with Lois and the kids from Les Mis on a school field trip. They'd chosen the Freedom Trail, a 90-minute guided walking tour of historic Boston sites sponsored by the Parks Department. Now let's remember to practice our accents on that one. It's the Parks Department. Tour guides can be hit or miss, but ours was deep, eloquent, passionate, subtle, and engaging. Imagine what that must have been like, she said as we stood before the old State House, where the Declaration of Independence was first read aloud. To hear those beautiful words of freedom for the first time ever. Think how radical they were, and what those first listeners must have felt. And then she was silent for a moment. And I think we were all surprised to feel our eyes welling up in a surge of unexpected patriotism. We visit Faneuil Hall, the Old South Meeting House, the Boston Massacre site, and several other locations, all thoroughly interesting. And then after the tour, we went to the house of Paul Revere, where the kids got to dress up in the clothing of the day. Did you know that Paul Revere never said the British are coming? In fact, there are a number of erroneous items in Longfellow's historic poem. For example, Paul Revere didn't work alone. William Dawes, who also took that midnight ride via another route, was never even mentioned. And that's probably because Dawes wasn't as easy to rhyme. While Revere is a rhymer's dream. Here, near, dear, cheer. Well, you get the idea. Or maybe Paul just had a better publicist. At any rate, I'd like, if I may, to correct this tragic historical oversight right here and now with a poem of my own composing, a poem I call The Midnight Ride of William Dawes. Listen, my children, without guffaws, to the midnight ride of William Dawes. He had a horse and rode it well. That other guy can go to hell. An upstanding man, that was one of his flaws. He stopped at red lights not to break any laws. Through streets and through towns, and all for the cause, rode the brave unsung hero named William Dawes. 'Tis a sad, sad tale that always awes, that midnight ride of William Dawes. He yelled, "They're coming," for all to hear. "We know," said the townfolk. "We heard it from Revere." He made it to Concord after many a pause, but the British were waiting for poor William Dawes. They had him arrested and wrapped him in gauze. He was menaced by lions who showed him their claws, hammered with hammers, severed with saws. None of this happened, but it all rhymes with Dawes. Oh, listen, my children, and you will hear of the guy who rode, like Paul Revere, a patriot, robbed of his rightful applause, that well-meaning horseman, polite William Dawes. Requests for inclusion in poem anthologies should be directed to my agent. Glad I could clear that up. Back at the theater, we were continuing to enjoy some of our best audiences ever. Most nights when the show was over, we were greeted at the stage door by hardcore Mizzies, some of whom saw the show several times during the run. It's a tricky thing, this actor-fan juxtaposition. After the show, most of us are in a hurry to get ourselves to some food, a bar, or a bed. And yet the attention is nice. And yet there's a limit. And yet we don't want to be ungracious. And yet it's such a strange dynamic. On the inside, very few of us feel like anything more than just normal human beings with hang-ups and insecurities and problems. Just people going to work and doing our jobs. But some fans seem to feel there's a great chasm between us and them. They approach shyly and cautiously, if at all, and treat us like some sort of superhuman, spectacular creatures. I suppose some performers buy into it, but for most of us, it's uncomfortable in the extreme. Among the stage door regulars, I began to notice one very enthusiastic fellow who showed up over and over again, cornering other cast members in long conversations about their performances. He was an odd creature, this particular man, with a wiry sprig of unkempt hair, a bulbous, constantly runny nose, and a voice that was always just a few decibels too loud. He talked at an unbearably slow cadence, and I inferred from his manner that he might have been mildly mentally retarded. We used to say retarded. I would say challenged now. Sweet guy, but I didn't want to get caught in a long conversation with him, so I was glad to remain unrecognized. One night, I was leaving the theater. I was famished. All through the show, I'd been thinking about the Rock Bottom Brewery's quesadillas and a margarita. I bundled up and barreled through the stage door, chattering with coworkers, and there he was. "Are you in the Master of the House scene?" he asked, as the others continued on. "Oh, no, I'm not. Sorry." He looked slightly confused. "Okay," he said, and off I went. By the time I reached the restaurant, I was already feeling like a bit of a heel. I had my lousy margarita, but I didn't enjoy it. An hour later, as I walked home along Boston Common, I was thinking about that man, spending his time and money to come to the show over and over again. I saw his face in my mind, and I began to wonder, where did he live? What was his life like? And how did he afford all those performances of Les Miserables? I hated my behavior. Had I really lied to avoid talking to him? I'd become, at least for a moment, one of those horrible performers who treat fans as an inconvenience, dismissing the very people for whom we perform and who provide our salaries. My God, I'd forgotten about the very people that Les Miserables is about, those who are sometimes passed over by an unfeeling society. I woke up the next morning thinking about him. I looked for him that night after the show. He wasn't there. Days went by. He was nowhere to be seen. I knew I'd get over it, but at the moment I was feeling pretty disgusting. Why couldn't I have spared a few minutes to talk to a man who possibly hasn't had the easiest life and who nonetheless comes to the theater and loves it so much he wants to talk about it? Pretty heartless. Didn't I come to the theater for the same reasons? To find refuge from a difficult life? How the hell did I forget? This wasn't the kind of man I wanted to be. And so I prayed. I honestly did. I know it sounds dramatic, but I really wanted a do-over. I believe you get a few of those in a lifetime, and I wanted to cash one in. I wanted another chance to just make myself available to talk with this man and to give him my full attention. I knew it wasn't going to change his life or anything, and of course I had invented everything I knew about him. Maybe his life was just great. Maybe he was a wealthy genius entrepreneur without a care in the world. Who knows? But I was haunted, and I wanted another chance not to lie. Finally, about a week later, he was once again outside the stage door after the show, and I was so powerfully relieved that I charged right up and introduced myself, shaking his hand heartily. I can't imagine what he must have thought of this sudden enthusiasm, but he was glad to talk to me. I didn't bother to explain the discrepancy about whether I was in the show. We had a good chat, and he told me the parts of my role he liked best, and I told him my favorite parts. He couldn't possibly have known how moved I was. "Stay right here, John," I said. "I have something for you." "Okay." I went back inside the stage door. I bounded up the stairs to my dressing room, thanking God the whole way, and grabbed the little red book that I'd carried with me throughout the tour, an old copy of the abridged Les Miserables. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Here, I want you to have this. It's just a thank you for coming to see us so much." "Okay, thanks. I already have the book, though." "That's okay. I want you to take it anyway." It meant much more to me than it did to him, and that's fine. But I needed to give him something that was important to me, something that I'd miss, because John had given me something important, and maybe the most important gift in 2 years of touring, a reminder of what it's all about. There isn't a margarita in the world that can give you that. On our last weekend in Boston came the great snow of 2003, making everything clean and white to match my recovered soul. All told, a near-record 16.9 inches fell, the second greatest December snowstorm Boston had ever seen. I opened my door Sunday morning to find a wall of the stuff, caked up as high as my waist. The world was bathed in whiteness, with straggling flakes drifting down, gracefully and silently, from out of a pearl-colored sky. I was dazzled. There were dunes all along the sidewalk, that looked like big scoops of coconut ice cream. It took me a moment to figure out that there were cars under there. Hardly anyone was driving, so the streets were all filled with incredulous pedestrians shaking their heads as they looked at each other, smiling, not sure what to make of it all. Our crew wasn't quite so amused. The coincidence of the great snow and the end of our run was bad news for them. The Colonial's back alley is only big enough for one truck, or 4 horse-drawn carriages and 1 yapping dog, so loading a show in and out was already a slow process. This was going to make it even slower. These guys really are the unsung heroes of touring. But Detroit was beckoning, and snow or no snow, it was time to pack up again and move on. Somehow I didn't expect it to be quite so memorable as Boston. The snow crunched under my sneakers as I slipped and slid my way down Charles Street, dragging my suitcases behind me on my way to the Colonial for our final 2 shows. I was thinking how thankful I was that those suitcases had wheels, though at the moment a toboggan might have been even better. And thankful, too, that every once in a while, if you're very fortunate, you get a do-over. Cheers. Or as they say here, cheers. May your holidays be wicked, merry, and bright. Kostrov. This is a picture of Boston Common during that great snowstorm. It's beautiful. All right. Oh, the next chapter's fun. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to taking you to, I guess it's Detroit the week after next. All right, see you there. Bye.